Hey guys, tonight we drift out across the Aegean Sea, a place so blue it looks like the gods themselves spilled a jar of sky onto the earth. You can almost taste the salt in the air, feel the warmth of a Mediterranean night pressing against your skin. Below you, the waves are calm, but every ripple carries a secret tales of gods, merchants, lovers, and wars that once carved the bones of these islands. You probably won't survive this journey if you forget to breathe though, because the stories here can pull you under faster than a whirlpool near Crete. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where in the world we're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sea stretches endlessly around you, an ancient mirror reflecting constellations that sailors once trusted with their lives. You can imagine a small wooden boat rocking gently beneath your feet, ropes creaking, the faint perfume of olive oil and tar in the air. Somewhere out there, the wind hums like a lyre. This isn't just water, it's history liquefied. Every wave brushing your boat is a hand from the past, reminding you that civilizations were born here and some died here too. The Aegean Sea lies cradled between Greece and Turkey, sprinkled with hundreds of islands, some barely large enough for a goat, others holding ruins older than written words. To ancient Greeks, this wasn't geography. It was a living god. They called it Aegean Pelagos, the Sea of Goats, perhaps for the choppy waves that looked like skipping hooves. But others whispered that Aegean came from a sea monster Yan, the stormbringer chained beneath the waters. Historians still argue whether the name was poetic, mythic, or just an inside joke among early mariners. You lean over the edge, peering into the dark. The water glows faintly with plankton-tiny stars in liquid form. The ancients believed this glow came from divine tears or souls lost at sea. They might not have known about bioluminescent microorganisms, but honestly, can you blame them? It does look like magic. Somewhere nearby, a dolphin breaks the surface, breathing out a silvery mist before diving back into the deep. Dolphins were sacred to Apollo, symbolizing protection for sailors. Killing one was said to anger the gods, though, fun fact, some Greek fishermen still swear that dolphins steal fish from their nets and smirk while doing it. You row onward, your arms moving in rhythm with the gentle slap of water against the hull. The air smells faintly of pine and salt, the same scent travelers might have inhaled 3,000 years ago. Picture a Minoan ship cutting through this same water-painted eyes on the prow, as if the vessel itself could see danger coming. Those eyes weren't just decoration. The ancient sailors believed they guided the ships safely home. Today, some Greek fishing boats still have those eyes, a wink from the past to superstition that never really went away. The Aegean has always been both cradle and grave. The islands are close enough that you can hop from one to another like stepping stones, but far enough that storms could trap you for weeks. That balanced connection and isolation created a mosaic of cultures that shared gods and traded goods, yet grew distinct in accent, art, and temperament. Imagine living on a rocky island where water is scarce and survival depends on reading the moods of the sea. One wrong forecast, and your entire cargo could sink to Poseidon's dark ballroom below. Speaking of Poseidon, he's the moody one, here the god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses. You might think horses and waves have nothing in common. But the Greeks saw the white foam of the sea as the mane of divine steeds. Legend says Poseidon could summon storms just by stamping his trident into the ocean floor. Historians still debate whether these myths were inspired by real seismic events, because Greece then, as now, loves a good earthquake. One strong tremor could flatten temples and send entire fleets to the bottom, convincing everyone that the sea god had lost his temper again. You tilt your head back, gazing at the sky. The same constellations Orion, Cassiopeia, the Great Bear once guided sailors across these waters. The Greeks didn't just name the stars, they humanized them, turned them into stories. A fisherman lost at sea might look up and think, there's Perseus, still chasing glory. The night sky became a map of both heaven and memory. And it still works, in case your phone's GPS dies while island hopping. Let's drift closer to shore. You can hear the faint buzz of cicadas, the soft clink of waves against rock. In the Bronze Age, these coastlines weren't tourist destinations, they were lifelines. Villages clung to the edges like barnacles, living off trade routes that stretched as far as Egypt and the Levant. Archaeologists have found Aegean pottery fragments in Cyprus, Lebanon, even along the Nile. Proof that these people weren't isolated dreamers, they were networked merchants long before Wi-Fi. Still, sailing wasn't easy. Imagine setting out in a wooden ship powered by oars and wind, trusting that the gods or your intuition would steer you right. Navigation was part skill, part prayer. Historians think early Greek mariners hugged the coastlines because they feared open water. Others argue they were bold enough to cross from Crete to the Cyclades under starlight alone. There's no consensus, only admiration for their nerve. And yet, with danger came wonder. The Aegean was full of strange noises, humming winds through stone coves, echoing splashes in hidden bays. Ancient sailors believed these were the voices of nymphs or drowned men. One papyrus fragment even describes a singing sea near Rhodes, possibly the sound of waves hitting underwater caves. Or maybe it was just one drunk helmsman inventing a good story to get out of work. Either way, the legend stuck. You can almost feel that chill, can't you? The sense that the water is alive, listening. Even today, divers report hearing eerie vibrations below the surface. Some think it's natural sonar. Others, ancient echoes reverberating through the deep. There's something comforting and a little unsettling about knowing the same waves have whispered to human ears for thousands of years. Let's lighten the mood a bit. Picture a group of ancient sailors, maybe from Mycenaean, pulling into a small cove after a long voyage. They'd roast fish, pour wine, and tell tall tales about near-death experiences like that one guy who swore he saw a mermaid with a spear. By morning, they'd set out again, nursing headaches that no philosopher could explain. It's oddly relatable. Replace the amphory with beer cans, and it's just another camping trip. Still, beneath all the humor and bravado, they respected this sea deeply. They built shrines on cliffs and tossed offerings into the surf coins. Oil, sometimes entire bowls if they were feeling generous. The sea took lives, but it also gave them meaning. Without these waters, Greece wouldn't have become the tapestry of culture it did. The islands linked minds as much as markets, spreading not just goods, but ideas, stories, and songs. And when storms rolled in, even the toughest sailors felt small. Lightning forked across the water, thunder echoing off island walls like a warning drum. The ancients didn't see weather. They saw gods in conversation. Every storm was a message, though rarely a polite one. You can almost hear it now, the booming voice of Zeus arguing with Poseidon while mortals cling to their boats, promising eternal devotion if they make it home alive. Somewhere on the horizon, the moon begins to rise huge and red, like molten bronze. It paints the sea with shifting light, each wave a page in a book you're slowly learning to read. The Aegean doesn't reveal its secrets all at once. It tempts you, tests you, then rewards your patience with glimpses of what was. Beneath those waters lie shipwrecks, temples, and perhaps the truth behind myths we've long mistaken for dreams. You trail your fingers through the water. It's cool, soothing, eternal. Somewhere out there, perhaps a ghostly trireme still sails beneath the stars, its oars moving soundlessly in rhythm with the tides. Or maybe it's just your imagination, stirred by history and salt. Either way, the journey has only begun. The Aegean has many more secrets to share. The night deepens, and the water around you begins to shimmer with reflected starlight. The Aegean hums like something alive, ancient and patient. You pull your cloak tighter not against cold, but against the strange sensation of being watched by history itself. The air smells faintly of resin and crushed herbs, the way it must have smelled to the first sailors who dared cross this sea in the age before iron, when bronze gleamed like treasure and fire was a god's gift. You drift into the era of the Minoans and Mycenaeans, civilizations that burned brightly long before Athens and Sparta ever flexed their muscles. Somewhere below the waves lie the remnants of palaces, Cretes, Knossos, Phaistos, and Acroteri, where painted walls still whisper in color. You can almost see them now, sprawling halls with red columns, frescoes of dolphins leaping through blue water, and women with curling hair pouring wine into gold cups. The Minoans were not warriors. They were dreamers of the sea. You pass over the faint outline of what might be a harbor, a ghostly grid beneath the waves near Crete's northern coast. Historians still argue whether this was truly the first maritime empire or just an island kingdom that got lucky with trade winds, but it's clear they ruled the sea by ships, not swords. The Minoans built vessels sleek and fast, capable of reaching Egypt and Cyprus, carrying pottery, saffron, and the kind of fine textiles that would make any noble blush. You can almost hear the creak of ropes and the shouts of sailors as they loaded amphorae under the bright Aegean sun. The Minoans worshipped the sea as both mother and monster. Their goddess, sometimes called the mistress of the animals, was linked to the ocean's fertility, its ability to give and take. Bulls, too, played a strange role. The famous bull-leaping fresco from Knossos shows young athletes vaulting over the backs of massive bulls in a ritual that was half sport, half prayer. Maybe it symbolized courage before chaos, or maybe it was just an ancient version of extreme sports. Either way, it's a reminder that the people of the Aegean had a flair for the dramatic long before theater existed. And then there's the labyrintha, grand enigma. Legend tells of King Minos, his monstrous son, the Minotaur, and the hero Theseus, who braved the twisting corridors with a ball of thread. Historians still debate whether there was ever a real labyrinth beneath Knossos, or if the sprawling palace itself with its hundreds of rooms, staircases, and columns was the inspiration. You imagine wandering those halls, torch in hand, hearing the echo of hooves that never quite fade. But every paradise has its fall. Around 1600 BCE, the island of Thera, modern Santorini, exploded in one of the largest volcanic eruptions in recorded history. The sky darkened, the sea boiled, and ash blanketed the world as far as Egypt. The thriving Minoan cities were devastated, their fleets destroyed by tsunamis. Some say this disaster was the seed of the Atlantis Mycenaean island civilization swallowed by the sea. Whether that's true or not, the timing fits a little too neatly. You look toward the horizon and imagine the roar of that eruption, the red glow of molten earth, and the Minoans watching helplessly as their world cracked open. In the ruins of Acroteri, preserved beneath volcanic ash, archaeologists found murals of ships long, narrow, decorated with swaying flags and crews rowing in perfect unison. These paintings are hauntingly detailed, proof that these ancient people were obsessed with the sea's rhythm. It wasn't just their livelihood, it was their language. Even now, the ruins seem to hum when the wind passes through them, like the echo of distant drums. After the Minoans came the Mycenaeans, mainland Greeks who admired Crete's wealth but brought with them a taste for conquest. Where the Minoans danced with the sea, the Mycenaeans demanded tribute from it. They built fortresses on high cliffs, Mycenae, Tyrants, and Pylos, a honeycomb of stone and authority. You can picture the bearded kings standing on battlements, staring at the same waters that once belonged to their peaceful neighbors. Their world was carved in bronze swords, bronze helmets, bronze mirrors. They traded far and wide, even reaching the shores of Anatolia. Some scholars think their raids inspired parts of the Iliad. That mythic war over Helen of Troy might have been less about love and more about control of Aegean trade routes. After all, what better reason for war than money dressed up as romance? You imagine being on a Mycenaean galley, 50 men, rowing in unison, sweat dripping, voices grunting in rhythm. Above them, a square sail billows in the wind, painted with symbols of lions and suns. The smell of tar, salt, and fear mingles in the air. Out here, storms are as deadly as enemies, and the gods are always watching. Before each voyage, sailors poured wine into the water, whispering prayers to Poseidon for safe passage. If the ship returned, they sacrificed a goat. If it didn't, well, the sea got its due. But like all great powers, the Mycenaeans eventually fell. Around 1200 BCE, their palaces burned. Theories abound: invaders, earthquakes, internal revolt. Or perhaps a chain reaction of collapsed trade networks after the Trojan War. Historians still argue. Whether the sea peoples mentioned in Egyptian records were involved, mysterious marauders who appeared from nowhere and vanished into legend. What's left of the Mycenaeans are their monumental tombs, the so-called treasury of Atreus, beehive-shaped and echoing like hollow hearts. You can step inside one today and feel the weight of silence pressing on your chest, as if the dead still remember. Down in the deep trenches of the Aegean, divers have found bronze tools, anchors, even human bones that may have belonged to those early sailors. There's one particular site near Cathora where a 3,500-year-old shipwreck yielded cargo, fine ceramics, obsidian blades, and something stranger collection of animal bones packed deliberately into a jar. No one knows why. Some suggest ritual, others superstition. Maybe it was just a sailor's lunch gone horribly wrong. Either way, it's a reminder that the line between practical and mystical was thin in this world. As you float above these ruins in your imagination, the sea becomes a palimpsest, layers of civilization, written, erased, and rewritten. The Minoans carved their language, Linear A, into clay tablets. The Mycenaeans used Linear B, an early form of Greek that recorded everything from palace inventories to offerings for the gods. Most of it reads like accounting sheets. 10 jars of oil for the Lady of the Labyrinth, but even bureaucracy carries poetry when it's 3,000 years old. Every so often, a phrase emerges that makes you pause. To the sea people, one oxen. Who were these sea people? Were they traders? Pirates, refugees from volcanic lands? Historians still debate, of course, but you can't help imagining them as ghostly wanderers, families on creaking boats, chasing safety, haunted by smoke and memory. The Aegean was no passive witness. Its waves carried cultures like letters across an endless conversation. When the Minoans fell, their myths didn't die. They drifted north, whispering into the dreams of the Mycenaeans, who would one day inspire Homer. Even now, the faint hum of oars seems to linger in the night, as if those ancient crews never stopped rowing. You look down, and for a moment, you think you see movement in the deep columns of stone, flickering lights. Maybe it's just tricks of moonlight on waves. Or maybe it's Knossos itself, breathing beneath the water, still waiting for someone to remember. A gull cries overhead, startling you back to the surface. The air tastes different here, heavier, older. You feel the presence of countless generations who once sailed these same routes, whispering their fears and prayers into the wind. And though you're only imagining it, you swear the sea is whispering back soft, rhythmic, eternal. Before long, dawn begins to bloom on the horizon. The light spills over the islands like honey, touching everything with warmth and life. You can almost hear the laughter of children from some lost harbor, the clang of bronze from a distant forge. The Aegean stirs awake again, its secrets momentarily visible before the day grows too bright. And you, adrift between myth and memory, realize the sea has been telling its story all along. You're just finally quiet enough to listen. The sun has fully risen now, gilding the crests of the waves with molten light. You've drifted toward a cluster of islands, tiny specks scattered like jewels across the Aegean's restless skin. The air here hums differently. There's a sweetness to it, a faint smell of thyme and incense, as though someone, somewhere, still burns offerings to forgotten gods. Welcome to the Sacred Islands, where divinity was once as common as sea salt on skin. And mortals danced their prayers into the sand. Your oar dips softly into the water as you approach Delos. The island said to be the birthplace of Apollo and Artemis, the twin children of Zeus and Leto. Legend claims that Leto wandered the earth in agony, pursued by Hera's jealousy, until the floating island of Delos rose from the sea to shelter her. It's a poetic origin, but also deeply practical. Delos really does feel otherworldly. Its rocky slopes rising from the water like a miracle. Its silence almost reverent. Even today, no one is allowed to be born or die on the island, a tradition reaching back thousands of years. The ancients believed it was too pure for mortal beginnings or endings. Imagine the logistics of that, sailing women in labor across the waves to give birth somewhere else. You beach your small imaginary boat on a shore paved with marble fragments, the remnants of temples and markets that once made Delos the spiritual and economic heartbeat of the Aegean. In the first millennium BCE, this place buzzed with pilgrims from across Greece, merchants, priests, philosophers, and opportunists, eager to leave an offering to Apollo, god of light, music, and, occasionally, smug perfection. You can almost hear the lyres and flutes drifting on the breeze, the murmur of prayers echoing off white stone. Delos was also a marketplace, and historians still argue whether its sacredness made it rich or its riches made it sacred. Archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of carved dedications, miniature altars, bronze tripods, and amphorae inscribed with the names of faraway donors. It's like the ancient version of influencer sponsorship. Donate enough, and maybe your name will live forever. The island even hosted athletic and musical competitions in Apollo's honor, because what better way to please a god of beauty than by sweating artistically? Wander farther inland, and you reach the sanctuary of the bulls, a courtyard lined with the remains of enormous statues. Here, priests once led processions carrying golden laurel branches and bowls of honey. Offerings weren't always solemn. Some involved music, wine, and dance that lasted until dawn. One tablet describes a group of youths performing circling dances around the altar, spinning faster and faster until they collapsed, trembling in what priests called divine ecstasy. Was it faith, or just the ancient equivalent of too much mead? Historians still debate. You make your way uphill, the path lined with shards of pottery and mosaics that catch the morning light. From the summit, you can see a scatter of other islands: Knossos, Paros, Cyrosech, carrying its own myths like luggage too precious to abandon. Knossos, for example, is said to be where Theseus abandoned Ariadne after she helped him escape the labyrinth. Tough break for her, though Dionysus, god of wine and chaos, later found her sleeping on the beach and decided she'd make a fine queen. Romantic, if you ignore the whole kidnapping while unconscious part. Knossos was also sacred to Dionysus, and you can almost feel his presence in the rolling vineyards and sunburned cliffs. Ancient festivals here were notoriously wild and intoxicating mix of theater, music, and, well, intoxication. Worshippers, known as Maenads, danced barefoot through olive groves, their laughter mingling with the crash of waves. They wore ivy crowns, carried those fancy pine-cone-tipped staffs, and believed Dionysus entered their bodies during the dance. A few scholars suggest these rituals were symbolic expressions of liberation. Others think they were just excellent excuses for public partying. Either way, no one can deny that Dionysian joy shaped the Greek soul. As you drift between these islands, you begin to realize that religion here wasn't locked in temples, it was alive, breathing through every celebration, every harvest, every gust of wind. The Greeks didn't just believe in their gods. They lived alongside them. A sudden storm wasn't random, it was Zeus flexing his authority. A calm sea, Poseidon in a good mood, the sweet scent of wine, Dionysus smiling from the vine. Even simple acts like fishing or bathing carried a whisper of divinity. Off the coast of Naxos lies a smaller island called Delphi's sister, now little more than a rocky mound. In ancient times, though, it was home to an oracle devoted to Apollo. Sailors would bring jars of seawater and pour them over the altar, believing the god would bless their journeys. One fragmentary inscription found there reads, "He who listens to the sea shall hear the truth." That line alone makes you pause. Was the oracle's voice perhaps inspired by the wind in sea caves or the bubbling of volcanic springs beneath? Historians still argue whether the famed oracles were genuine mystics or simply high on natural gas fumes. Either way, the advice they gave shaped destinies. Your mind drifts to the island of Samothrace, another sacred site, home to the mysterious Kabiri cult. Few records survive, but ancient travelers describe secret nighttime ceremonies involving fire, music, and a symbolic sea voyage reenacted on land. Participants believed they gained protection at sea after initiation. Alexander the Great's parents were both said to be initiates, proof that even the mighty feared the deep. Archaeologists have unearthed a massive sanctuary there, including the famed winged victory of Samothrace, now residing in the Louvre, forever frozen mid-flight, as if about to leap off her marble prow and vanish into mist. The deeper you explore, the more you see how each island acted like a node in a vast spiritual network. Worship wasn't about dogma, it was about rhythm of tides, of seasons, of life. Even fishermen whispered charms before casting their nets. Some tied little terracotta charms, shaped like squid, to their boats for luck. Others carried amulets made from pumice stone. One particularly strange tradition, recorded near Lesbos, involved sprinkling fish guts into the sea while chanting to appease the daughters of the foam. Charming, if not especially fragrant. The Greeks were practical mystics. They built altars on cliffs to thank Poseidon for safe passage and temples and caves to honor nymphs, who sang through dripping water. These cave sanctuaries, like the one at Amnisos, Crete, blend natural beauty with eerie intimacy. Inside, stalactites glitter like chandeliers while water drips rhythmically into shallow pools. The ancients left offerings here: bronze blades, small statues, even seashells filled with honey. You imagine kneeling in that damp coolness, torch flickering, and understanding instinctively why they saw the divine in stone and water alike. But faith can blur into fear. For all their devotion, the islanders never forgot that gods were fickle. A wrong sacrifice, a careless boast, and you could find yourself cursed with storms or madness. There's an old story from Paros about a fisherman who mocked Apollo's priests after a feast. The next morning, his boat was found drifting empty, a lyre tangled in its net. Coincidence? Maybe. But the story stuck for centuries. The sun climbs higher, and you push off again, your small craft gliding over turquoise depths that shift into dark blue trenches. Beneath you lie underwater ruins columns, toppled by quakes, shards of amphorae resting in sand like sleeping memories. One recent discovery near Delos revealed an entire ancient port, complete with carved mooring stones and steps leading directly into the sea. Some historians suggest the Aegean's water level rose over the millennia, swallowing the edges of civilization inch by inch. If that's true, then the gods didn't vanish, they simply moved a little deeper. You find yourself smiling at the thought. The idea that divinity might still hum beneath the surface, hidden but not gone, is oddly comforting. The sea here is layered, each depth a different century, each current a different prayer. A warm wind stirs your hair, carrying the faint scent of rosemary and something sweet, maybe fig trees blooming on a nearby island. The sound of waves against rock is hypnotic, almost percussive. You close your eyes, letting it wash over you, and for a moment you feel the heartbeat of the Aegean itself. It's the same rhythm that guided priests through moonlit rituals, sailors through uncharted waters, and lovers across starlit beaches. Somewhere, a bell tolls from a modern fishing village, metal striking metal, echoing through centuries. The present and the past ripple together, inseparable. The sacred hasn't disappeared. It's just wearing new clothes. You dip your hand into the sea again, half expecting to feel a god's pulse beneath your fingers. Instead, you feel only warmth, salt, and life. The water slips away like silk, whispering in a language older than time. The Aegean doesn't keep its secrets. It simply waits for someone quiet enough to listen. The breeze shifts as you leave the sacred islands behind, carrying with it the faint clang of distant bells and the ghostly laughter of forgotten festivals. Your little boat glides eastward, following invisible trade routes that once tied the Aegean to the wider world. The sea feels busier here, its silence layered with the echoes of merchants shouting from ship to ship, the creak of cargo ropes, and the thrum of ambition. You're entering the waters of exchange, deception, and prophecy where merchants, pirates, mute, and oracles all played their parts beneath the same sun. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Imagine a blend of olive oil, tar, garlic, and sweat baked under Mediterranean heat. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. You picture a bustling harbor on the island of Knossos, or roads around the 7th century BCE, ships from Phoenicia unloading purple dye, Egyptian traders offering papyrus and gold trinkets, Greek merchants haggling over amphorae of wine and olive oil. The Aegean wasn't just a sea. It was a floating marketplace, a salty bazaar that connected cultures from Africa to Anatolia. The Greeks were master merchants. Their islands lacked forests and fertile plains, so they turned necessity into innovation, exporting olive oil, pottery, and ideas. Amphorae stamped with distinctive seals have been found as far west as Spain and as far east as Syria. One might imagine a crate of Mycenaean's finest olive oil breaking open in a foreign port, perfuming the docks and making everyone suddenly hungry. Yet trade was never entirely safe. Pirates prowled these waters like sharks, some professional, others opportunistic. The Aegean's narrow channels and countless coves made perfect ambush points. Historians still argue whether piracy was truly criminal in those days or simply another line of work. The lines between merchant and marauder blurred easily, especially when a merchant ship discovered how much quicker it was to plunder than to trade. Take, for example, the tale of the notorious pirate Aegean of Knossos, a man said to have attacked more ships than Poseidon had tridents. One story tells of how he raided a Corinthian vessel loaded with spices, and instead of killing the crew, he threw them a feast on shore, boasting that generosity made him richer in reputation. It didn't last. He was eventually captured by Athenian patrols and sentenced to labor in the silver mines. Still, sailors swore they saw his ghostly ship on moonless nights, its sails black as squid ink, gliding silently over calm waters. As your own imaginary ship passes through this haunted trade zone, you notice the coast of Delphi drawing near. The mountains rise sharply from the sea, cliffs gleaming like bone under the midday sun. Here, pilgrims once began their long climb inland to the oracle of Apollo, the most famous prophetess in all of Greece. It's hard to believe that such a spiritual center was fed by the same maritime arteries that carried pirates and smugglers. But that's the Aegean for you. Contradiction by design. You tie your boat near a rocky inlet and begin to climb, imagining yourself among the travelers of old fishermen seeking luck, merchants asking which ports to trust, kings demanding victory. The oracle's reputation stretched from Iberia to Babylon. People believed that Apollo himself spoke through his chosen priestess, the Pythia, who sat above a fissure exhaling sacred vapors. You've probably heard the debate. Were those vapors real? Historians still argue whether the trance-like prophecies came from inhaled gases or psychological ritual. Modern scientists did find evidence of ethylene rising from bedrock fractures near the site. So yes, ancient spirituality might have been mildly psychedelic. You step into the temple in your imagination, the marble cool beneath your feet. The scent of laurel leaves and burning myrrh fills the air. Somewhere below, water drips rhythmically, and from a chamber beyond comes a murmur, a woman's voice speaking in riddles. Her words twist and echo, impossible to decipher until priests interpret them. She tells generals whether to wage war, kings whether to marry, and sailors whether to trust the winds. A single phrase could decide a nation's fate. And yet, most of the time, the answers were ambiguous enough to be correct no matter what happened. The oracle was ancient Greece's first great politician. You leave Delphi and return to the coast, the sound of cicadas loud in your ears. Down by the water, small fishing boats rock gently, and for a moment you can almost forget the intensity of that mountain air. Aegean gleams ahead, reflecting light like shards of glass. But beneath the shimmer lies danger. Ancient mariners feared certain straits where the currents turned violent without warning. The most infamous being the narrow passage between Euboea and the mainland, known for whirlpools that swallowed whole vessels. To appease Poseidon, sailors would toss coins or bits of bread into the water before crossing. One captain allegedly threw in his wedding ring. His ship survived the crossing, but his marriage did not. Trade and prophecy often overlapped. Merchants would stop at small seaside shrines before long voyages, leaving gifts for local nymphs or sea spirits. One such site near Cape Sunion has yielded hundreds of clay figurines of dolphins and fish. Some bear inscriptions like "for safe return" or "in thanks for cargo spared." The act of commerce was itself sacred. Each voyage, a gamble where divine favor mattered as much as wind and skill. Let's talk about the odds side of it all. There are records of sailors consulting, talking fish. Yes, really? The story comes from an island off Lesbos, where fishermen believed a certain species of tuna could speak prophecies if caught alive. Supposedly, priests would translate the gurgling sounds into messages from Poseidon. Historians still argue whether this was satire, local theater, or a very creative fishing scam. Whatever the truth, it perfectly captures the blend of piety and absurdity that colored Aegean life. As your imaginary ship sails onward, the wind fills the sail. And you find yourself among the Cyclades, islands that formed the backbone of trade routes for centuries. From these shores came marble, obsidian, and the most prized cargo of all stories. Every port had a bard, every tavern a legend. Travelers swapped tales like currency, and myths spread as easily as rumors. At night, the harbors glowed with torchlight. You can almost hear the sound of laughter, dice clattering on wooden tables, someone strumming a lyre near the pier. There's the slap of sandals on wet stone, the clink of amphorae being stacked, and the occasional yell when a thief is caught, worse when he isn't. Life here was a constant performance, equal parts devotion and deceit. One popular tavern song from Rhodes Rock, favored as a fragment in a papyrus, speaks of the wind that sells lies. Scholars think it referred to merchants who exaggerated the quality of their wares. But you can imagine it sung drunkenly, mugs raised high, everyone laughing because they all lied too. Some things never change. Beneath all the trading and thieving, though, ran a current of shared faith. The Aegean was full of oracular springs, places where water was said to speak. Near Ephesus, travelers dropped lead tablets engraved with questions into sacred pools, hoping the ripples would spell out answers. One tablet unearthed not long ago reads, "Will my brother return from the sea?" A timeless human plea still suspended between hope and fear. By moonlight, your boat drifts once more. The stars scatter their silver dust across the waves, forming the same patterns that guided countless navigators before you. It's easy to imagine a Phoenician captain or a Greek trader gazing upward in awe and calculation. They called the North Star Knossos the dog's tail and trusted it like an old friend. But the Aegean had a way of humbling even the most experienced sailors. One wrong gust, one sudden fog, and all those stars vanished behind a curtain of mist. That's when the prayers began again. The night grows quieter. You sense the stories fading back into the deep, replaced by the rhythmic splash of water against your hull. Somewhere nearby, maybe on a distant headland. A fire burns, perhaps a fisherman warming himself, or perhaps an echo of ancient signal beacons that once warned cities of approaching fleets. In the Bronze Age, these fires linked island to island, a maritime Morse code that could relay messages faster than any ship. The idea that flickering flames once connected an entire civilization across these waters feels strangely modern. A sudden gust ripples your sail, bringing the scent of resin and figs. You lean back, letting the wind carry you onward. The sea has shifted tone. It feels heavier now, as though preparing to tell its next secret. You think of all those merchants who set sail under the same stars, pockets full of hope and goods, hearts full of prayers. You think of the pirates who chased them, of the oracles who promised victory or doom, and of the gods who watched it all with amused detachment. The Aegean was not a simple highway, was a mirror of human ambition, reflecting both greed and faith in equal measure. And as the night deepens, you can't help but feel that the sea is smiling at your thoughts, an ancient, knowing grin that says, "You think you understand me. Just wait." Morning drips slowly across the horizon, the Aegean glowing like molten bronze. You wake to the hush of gentle waves and the distant call of gulls. The night's chill lingers on your skin, but sunlight begins to warm your shoulders as if the gods themselves are whispering, "You made it through another night." The air smells faintly of salt and pine resin, mixed with the earthy breath of nearby cliffs. Ahead lies the next secret, the everyday rhythm of life along these ancient coasts, where fishermen, farmers, and storytellers lived under the same stars that guided kings and oracles. You pull your little craft toward a quiet cove, where the water turns so clear that you can count the pebbles beneath. In the shallows, children laugh as they chase small silver fish, while older men mend nets on the shore, their fingers moving with the patience of generations. This is where the true heart of the Aegean beats, not in marble temples or royal halls, but in the steady pulse of ordinary lives bound to the sea. Imagine an island like Paros or Naxos in the 6th century BCE. Stone houses cluster along a slope, their white walls gleaming even in dawn's half-light. Olive trees twist upward, their leaves flickering silver and green like 1,000 tiny mirrors. Goats bleat somewhere uphill. You can smell bread baking, barley porridge simmering, maybe a hint of fish stew waiting for the mid-morning meal. Life here is both humble and eternal work, rest, prayer, and laughter woven together like a fisherman's net. You wander among the islanders in your mind. They rise with the sun, labor in the fields or on the water, and measure time not by clocks, but by the movement of shadows and tides. Each morning, women walk down to the shore to wash clothes in seawater before rinsing them in freshwater springs. They gossip as they work about harvests, marriages, the priest's new sandals. One woman insists she saw a sea nymph near the rocks last night, her hair made of moonlight. The others giggle, but no one entirely disbelieves her. In the Aegean, myth and routine coexist so naturally that one can slip into the other without anyone noticing. By midday, the fishermen return, their boats small, painted with eyes to ward off evil bob gently as nets are hauled in. The catch glints in the sun. Red mullet, sardines, octopus curling its tentacles in protest. One man makes the sign of the cross before gutting a fish, though he calls it the mark of Poseidon rather than of Christ. The old faiths linger long in places like this. Even centuries after new gods arrived, whispers of the old ones clung stubbornly to the wind. There's a curious archaeological find from Knossos, a small shrine in a fisherman's hut dated around the 5th century BCE. Inside were offerings not just to Poseidon, but to the Lady of the Waves, an unnamed female spirit who appears nowhere else in known Greek myth. Was she a local goddess, a folk memory of something older? Historians still argue whether she represented Aphrodite in her sea-born form, or perhaps a pre-Greek deity absorbed into later worship. Whatever the truth, it reminds you how personalized the divine once was. Each bay, each spring, each headland could have its own guardian. As you stroll through this imagined island village, you notice how much of life revolves around preparation. Women twist wool into thread, and men carve plowshares from driftwood. Olive oil simmers in clay lamps. On a shaded terrace, a boy sits cross-legged, tracing letters into the dirt. His teacher, an old man with a beard like tangled kelp, taps the ground with a stick. "Remember," he says, "words are ships, they carry meaning across time." You smile at that. The ancients knew more about storytelling than they let on. Later, the entire village gathers near the beach for a small festival. A goat has been roasted, and someone plays a reed pipe. The music loops lazily through the warm air, rising and falling with the rhythm of the waves. Children dance barefoot in the sand, and the adults follow some reluctantly, some with abandon. There's laughter, spilled wine, the clatter of amphorae tipping over. For a moment, you forget centuries separate you. This is where the quirky side of history peeks through. The Greeks had an almost obsessive love of competition, even in relaxation. They held impromptu races on the beach, running, swimming, even drinking contests. Archaeologists once found a small bronze cup inscribed with, "To the one who could still stand." Whether it was a joke or a trophy, we may never know. You sit beside a fisherman who offers you bread dipped in olive oil. He tells you about the Meltemi, the seasonal wind that roars through the Aegean every summer. When it comes, the sea turns violent in an instant, snapping sails and dashing boats against rocks. He says it's the breath of Boreas, god of the north wind, angered by human arrogance. You nod, tasting salt on your lips. To him, the world isn't separate from the divine soaked in it. As the sun sets, the air cools and the islanders light oil lamps. Golden flickers dance across their faces, and the scent of burning olive wood drifts through the night. From somewhere uphill comes the soft murmur of Praia family, thanking the gods for safety, health, and enough fish to trade at the next market. You realize how much of this life depends on cooperation. No one survives alone here. The sea gives, but it also takes without mercy. There's a legend about a fisherman from Crete who once mocked Poseidon after catching an enormous tuna. He built a shrine to himself, calling it the conqueror of the sea. The next morning, his nets were empty. The morning after that, his boat was gonna vanish, as if swallowed whole. People whispered that Poseidon didn't kill him, but turned him into a coral reef, forever rooted in the depths he had dared to challenge. Sailors still tap their boats when passing certain reefs, murmuring, "Forgive the proud one." Whether true or not, it's a reminder that humility was a survival skill. Now you follow a narrow path along the coast. Moonlight glitters on the water, and somewhere far away, a dog barks. Offerings lie at its base: seashells, coins, a few figs. Even in ruin, it commands reverence. It's said that sailors heading out to sea would whisper their names to the statue, so the spirits would know who to watch for. There's something touching in that, the idea that the sea remembered you personally. The night deepens, and you rest on a cliff overlooking the water. Below, bioluminescent plankton shimmer like spilled stars. You dip your hand into the glow, and for a heartbeat, your fingers trail light. This, too, must have awed the ancients. Imagine seeing such a sight with no scientific explanation. How could it not feel like the touch of gods? Historians still argue whether ancient Greek sailors documented these glowing waters deliberately or dismissed them as divine tricks. Either way, the wonder remains unchanged. And here's another oddity for you. Archaeologists found clay tablets in the ruins of a small Aegean town listing daily offerings, not just to gods, but to the sea itself. It was treated as a sentient being. The entries read like this: 1 cup of wine, 1 fish, 1 promise. What kind of promise? The record doesn't say. Maybe that's for you to imagine tonight. Somewhere across the dark, a flute begins to play again, soft, slow, hypnotic. The melody threads through the wind like a lullaby for sailors lost at sea. You think of those who never returned. Of the families who watched the horizon and waited until the waiting became a way of life. The Aegean has always demanded sacrifice, but it also rewards devotion. Its people learned to move with its moods, to read its language, to love it, even when it took what they cherished most. As the last embers of the village fires fade behind you, you glance up. The stars are so bright, they almost hum. The Pleiades glimmer directly overhead, the seven sisters, symbols of navigation and fate. Ancient fishermen believed that when the Pleiades rose before dawn, it was time to set out to sea, and when they vanished, time to stay home. You trace them with your eyes and realize you're seeing the same cosmic clock that once governed entire lives. The wind cools your face. Somewhere below, waves break against the shore with a sound like deep breathing. You feel the island sigh, as though the land itself is settling into sleep. The hum of crickets replaces human voices, and you're alone with the soft percussion of the night. It's strange, isn't it? You began this journey chasing myths and grand temples. Yet the deeper you go, the more sacred the ordinary becomes. The smell of baked bread, the feel of salt-damp hands, the laughter that echoes across stone walls. Maybe that's the real secret of the Aegean. Its magic wasn't just divine. It was human, and it's still here, murmuring beneath every wave. You close your eyes, listening. The sea answers in whispers. Dawn drifts in like a secret, slow and golden. The Aegean lies smooth as silk beneath the rising sun, and your little craft bobs gently in the afterglow of dreams. You've seen the gods worshipped, the fishermen's lives unfolding, and the oracles speaking in riddles. But today, the sea will show you something different. The builders, thinkers, and artists who turned these rocky islands into beacons of civilization. The oars creak as you row toward the island of Samos, birthplace of Pythagoras. Yes, that Pythagoras, the triangle guy. Though if you had told him that was all people remembered him for, he might have sighed dramatically and gone off to invent another theorem out of spite. He wasn't just a mathematician. He was a mystic, a philosopher who believed numbers were the hidden music of the universe. You glide closer to the shore, half expecting to hear invisible harmonies vibrating through the air. The island rises from the water like a half-sculpted statue, its hills patched with olive trees and dry stone terraces. Along the coastline, ancient ruins peek out between fig groves columns toppled by time. Carved lions guarding nothing but the wind. The hum of cicadas fills the air, rhythmic as a chant. You beach the boat and begin walking inland, imagining yourself alongside those early thinkers who saw truth not in temples but in patterns, the geometry of shells, the ratio of waves breaking, the symmetry of constellations. On a hilltop once stood the great Aegean of Samos, one of the largest temples of the ancient world, dedicated to Hera, queen of the gods. Even in ruin, it's breathtaking. The single standing column towers against the blue sky like a sentinel, a reminder that beauty can survive collapse, according to one ancient source. Its builders measured proportions by the human body, an early whisper of the idea that humans were the measure of all things. You run your fingers across the stone, warm under the sun, and imagine the architects arguing about angles and alignment while swatting mosquitoes. Historians still argue whether temple builders followed divine inspiration or pure mathematics. Some say they constructed sacred geometry to channel cosmic energy. Others insist it was just good engineering and a lot of trial and error. Either way, the result still silences you. But not all the genius of the Aegean was carved in marble. You move on, following the sound of hammers and laughter, to a coastal workshop where bronze glows in the heat. Here, artisans shape gods and heroes from molten metal, sweat dripping down their necks as they work the bellows. The air is thick with the smell of charcoal and ambition. A young apprentice grins as his master scolds him apparently. He gave Athena too long a nose. You smile. Perfection, it seems, was always subjective. The islanders were inventors too. One of the great feats of Samos was the Tunnel of Eupolinos, a 6th century BCE engineering marvel. A water channel carved straight through a mountain from both ends, meeting perfectly in the middle. How they achieved such precision without modern tools still baffles scholars. You picture two dusty teams with chisels, torches, and questionable directions, shouting through solid rock, a little to the left. No, you're left. The fact they actually met in the center feels nothing short of miraculous. By midday, the sea calls you back. You drift once more into open water, the sun painting gold on your eyelids. Ahead lies the island of Delos Small, sacred and bursting with stories. According to legend, it's where Leto gave birth to the twin gods Apollo and Artemis after being chased across the world by Hera's jealousy. The island wasn't just holy, it was cosmopolitan, a kind of ancient crossroads where merchants, pilgrims, and artists mingled under divine supervision. You step ashore and the ground crunches with crushed marble. The ruins of Delos stretch out like a ghost city, avenues lined with headless statues. Mosaics glinting in the dust, doorways leading nowhere. You can almost hear the echoes of ancient footsteps. Once, this place throbbed with life. Traders shouting in different tongues, priests chanting hymns, dancers spinning under the sun. Even today, a strange energy hums through the stones. One of the more peculiar finds here is a set of marble lions, dozens of them, frozen in a long, silent row facing east. No one knows exactly why they were arranged that way. Some believe they guarded the sacred lake where Apollo was born. Others think they represented the island's eternal vigilance. Historians still argue whether they had symbolic power or were just a very impressive form of ancient landscaping. Either way, their stone faces catch the morning light as if still watching the horizon for something divine. You wander through what was once a merchant's house, its walls painted with dolphins leaping through stylized waves. In the mosaic floor, a woman's face gazes up at you, perhaps a goddess, perhaps a forgotten hostess. The detail is so fine that her eyes almost seem alive. Imagine the artist crouched over this same floor 2,000 years ago, setting each tile with deliberate care, unaware that one day strangers would stand here and whisper about his work. There's a peculiar warmth in these ruins. Not sadness, exactly more like the residue of joy that refuses to fade. You find yourself smiling again, thinking about how the Greeks never separated art from life. Even a drinking cup could tell a story. A plate could carry a myth. They didn't just decorate, they narrated. You climb higher up the slope, where wind whistles through broken doorframes. From this vantage, the Aegean sprawls endlessly, an ocean of light and history. It's easy to see why philosophers saw divinity in the natural world. Pythagoras, Anaximander, Heraclitus, they all looked at this same horizon and found meaning in motion. You cannot step into the same river twice, Heraclitus said. The same could be said for the Aegean. You cannot sail the same wave twice, for both you and the sea are always changing. There's humor in that too. Imagine a philosopher trying to explain flux to a fisherman who just wants to know whether tomorrow will bring good weather. The fisherman nods politely, then mutters, "So, do I bring the nets or not?" Some lessons resist practicality. As the day deepens, you set your course toward Athens, the intellectual heart of ancient Greece. The city's glow is faint on the horizon, like a dream made of marble and smoke. You pass ships laden with amphorae, their sails swollen like lungs. Some belong to traders, others to soldiers, but on the sea, rank dissolves. Everyone depends on the same winds. When you finally glimpse the Athenian coast, the Acropolis rises above the haze, a crown of columns catching the sunset. You anchor near Piraeus, the city's bustling port. Even in your imagination, the noise feels overwhelming. Shouts of dock workers, clatter of carts, bleating of sacrificial goats. The smell of fish and incense mixes with that unmistakable scent of urban life ambition. Here, in the narrow streets beyond the harbor, philosophy blooms like wild thyme between the stones. You pass men debating politics in the marketplace, their hands waving dramatically, their arguments fueled by wine. You hear snippets of thought that would shape the world. Justice, virtue, democracy, beauty. But also gossip who? Cheated whom? Who stole whose sandals? Who's pretending to be a student of Socrates just to impress people at dinner? You settle by a fountain, listening as an older man explains geometry to a group of curious youths using pebbles and lines in the dust. Knowledge, he says, is not about knowing facts. It's about seeing the harmony behind them. You think of the Aegean again, how its islands, scattered like stars, form a pattern only visible from above. The Greeks might have called that harmony cosmos, the order within chaos. Yet, even here, among reason and rhetoric, the old mysteries persist. A woman walks by carrying a small clay idol wrapped in linen, a votive for her household shrine. A child tosses coins into the sea for Poseidon's mood. Logic and superstition coexist, neither winning, both surviving. Maybe that's the truest reflection of the Aegean spirit, belief and curiosity sailing side by side. As night falls, torches flicker along the docks. The hum of conversation softens into laughter and song. You can almost hear the rhythm of oars from distant boats and the sigh of the tide curling against the hulls. Above, the constellations turn slowly, patient as ever. You trace them with your eyes, the same ones that guided Pythagoras' thoughts, the same that watched over Delos, the same that shimmered above the first temple stones on Samos. The city quiets by degrees. The scent of olive wood smoke drifts across the harbor, blending with the salt air. You close your eyes, feeling that faint pulse beneath everything, the rhythm that connects gods, builders, thinkers, and wanderers. It's the hum of creation itself. The moon is high now, throwing a silver path across the Aegean. You drift away from Athens, your oar slicing the reflection into trembling fragments. Behind you, the city fades into darkness. Sits philosopher snoring, its soldiers dreaming of glory. Its poets probably still awake somewhere, muttering rhymes to the stars. Ahead lies another kind of Greece, one shaped not by intellect or empire, but by faith, ritual, and unseen forces. The age of reason always shared its bed with the age of superstition, and on these islands the two were inseparable. The sea around you glows faintly in the moonlight, and you remember how the ancients thought of water as alive, a mirror, a doorway, sometimes even a god in disguise. The Aegean wasn't just geography, it was a personality, with moods as unpredictable as a cat's. The people who lived along its shores didn't simply navigate it, they negotiated with it. You pull your boat toward a rocky islet, its cliffs rising like sleeping beasts from the water. Here, the locals once came to leave offerings to the Nereids, the sea nymphs who were said to dance in the foam. Some stories paint them kind, others call them vengeful, dragging careless sailors to the deep. Historians still argue whether these tales were metaphors for ocean currents or genuine belief. Either way, the message was clear. Respect the sea, or the sea will remind you who's in charge. You find a flat rock near the shore, still warm from the day's sun, and sit. The night air tastes of salt and thyme. Somewhere inland, an owl calls, echoing through the cliffs. You close your eyes and imagine the ancient rituals that once took place here. A fisherman pours wine into the waves, whispering his family's names. A mother ties a scrap of cloth to a fig branch, praying for her son's safe return. A priest chants in the darkness, his words blending with the crash of surf until it's impossible to tell which sound belongs to man and which to nature. Then there are the stranger rituals, the ones whispered about but rarely written down. On some islands, people believed that the dead could wander back across the water once a year. To prevent this, they sealed jars with seawater and placed them by the hearth, hoping to trap restless spirits before dawn. Others sprinkled salt around their doors, not for flavor, but for protection. You've probably done something similar yourself without realizing it. Ancient habits survive in modern shapes. The Greeks had a word for the invisible energy that lingered in certain places, daemon. It didn't mean demon in the modern sense, but rather a spirit, a presence, something that hummed between worlds. A daimon might guard a spring, a grove, or even a household. Socrates himself claimed to have won a voice that warned him of bad decisions. Imagine trying that excuse today. Sorry, my inner daimon told me not to go to that meeting. But here, in this flickering moonlight, you understand why they believed. The sea feels alive, responsive. The waves lap against the rocks like a heartbeat. Even the air seems to shimmer with unseen intention. It's easy to forget that we once talked to nature as an equal. You push off again, letting the current guide you toward another island, this one larger. Greener, alive with the scent of cypress and sage. The locals here are known for their healers. The Iatroi, who mix herbs, chant spells, and sometimes burn offerings to Asclepius, god of medicine. You imagine arriving at a small healing sanctuary near the shore, where marble columns frame a courtyard of bubbling springs. Patients rest on stone benches, waiting for dreams. Dreams, yes, that was the secret of Asclepian healing. The sick would sleep within the temple, hoping that God would appear in their dreams to reveal a cure. Sometimes the cure was simple: drink this, bathe there. Other times, the dreams were bizarre visions of snakes licking wounds or of birds singing specific numbers of notes. Priests would interpret the symbols, prescribing both ritual and remedy. And it worked often enough for people to keep coming. Modern doctors roll their eyes, but let's be honest, dude, probably pay good money for a spa that offered snake-assisted dream therapy. Historians still argue whether the success of these temples came from faith, suggestion, or the placebo effect's ancient cousin. But lying there, surrounded by warm stone and the lull of the sea, you can see how healing could begin with belief. You leave the sanctuary and wander inland through olive groves, humming with cicadas. The night is deep blue, the air thick with perfume from wild herbs. You stumble upon a small amphitheater, its seats carved directly into the hillside. The moon casts long shadows across the stage. You can almost hear the echo of ancient drama Aeschylus or Sophocles, voices rising like waves, tragedy unfolding beneath the open sky. Greek theater wasn't just entertainment, it was ritual, catharsis, communion. Entire cities gathered to weep and laugh together, to confront their fears and flaws. You think about that, a culture that turned emotional release into art. One of the surviving fragments from an Athenian chorus says, "We are but actors in the play of gods." Maybe that's why their tragedies still feel relevant, because we're still improvising the same scripts. Down by the shore again, you spot a flicker of light, a solitary fisherman tending a small fire. You join him, and he nods without surprise, as if visitors from other centuries are routine. He offers you grilled squid on a stick. You accept. The meat is smoky, tender, perfectly charred. You sit in silence, watching the embers pop and the waves glint. He begins to tell you a story, his voice soft but steady. It's about a young sailor who fell in love with a sea goddess. Every night she rose from the waves to sing to him, and every dawn she vanished. The sailor promised to build her a temple if she stayed, but the moment he tried to capture her song in words, she disappeared forever. "That's the sea for you," the fisherman says. It gives you wonder, then takes it back. You smile, recognizing the truth in his tone. Some knowledge is meant to remain mysterious. Further along the coast, ruins of ancient sanctuaries still whisper their purpose. Small votive offerings, tiny clay limbs, eyes and hearts once lined their altars, each symbolizing a plea for healing or gratitude. A child's foot for a wound mended, an ear for prayers answered. You find one half buried in the sand, cool and smooth in your palm. Thousands of years gone, yet the message endures: I hoped, I healed. The Aegean world thrived on that kind of faith, half rationale, half mystical. It's easy to forget that science and spirituality were once siblings. When Hippocrates studied the body, he did so under the same sky where oracles spoke and demons whispered. Even the stars served double duty: navigation tools by night, omens by interpretation. As you set sail again, the sea begins to shimmer faintly, not with moonlight this time, but with tiny flickering lights beneath the surface. You lean over the edge, watching the glow bloom with every ripple. Bioluminescent plankton, but to ancient eyes, this was sacred fire, the breath of Nereus, the old man of the sea. Sailors swore that when the waves burned blue, the gods were near. You trail your hand through the glowing water, fingers leaving streaks of living light. It feels like tracing constellations underwater. You whisper half-jokingly, "All right, gods. I get it. You still know how to make an entrance." A breeze stirs, carrying the faint scent of smoke from a distant island. You squint and catch sight of torches moving along a ridge. For a heartbeat, you imagine it's the old procession of the Eleusinian mysteries, the secret rites honoring Demeter and Persephone. The initiates marched by night, carrying flames, chanting prayers no outsider was allowed to hear. What they saw or felt inside those temples remains one of antiquity's best-kept secrets. Historians still argue whether the experience was symbolic, spiritual, or hallucinogenic. But everyone agreed on one thing. Those who underwent the mysteries lost their fear of death. You lean back against the boat's edge, the stars overhead flickering like distant fires. Somewhere beneath you, the sea hums its eternal note. You think of all those who once looked to it for guidance, comfort, and forgiveness. And you realize you're doing the same in your own quiet way. The fisherman's story lingers in your mind, the goddess who sang until caught. Maybe the Aegean's true secret is that it always stays slightly out of reach, forever singing, never staying. That's what keeps it alive, generation after generation. The night deepens. You hear the low rhythm of waves against rock, steady as breath. You close your eyes, and the sound merges with your heartbeat. The Aegean, once again, feels less like a sea and more like a mind vast, mysterious, and full of voices that refuse to fade. The dawn slips across the horizon like spilled honey, and the Aegean glows gold again. You squint toward the east, where the first light touches distant islands, some crowned with whitewashed villages. Others wild and silent, mere specks of myth in an endless sea. You've crossed waters of gods and dreams, but now, as sunlight drips down the sky, you find yourself drifting toward a coast where human ambition burns brighter than divinity itself. This is the age of builders, traders, and thinkers, the hum of civilization rising from marble and sweat. The oars creak as you row closer to Delos, the sacred island said to be the birthplace of Apollo and Artemis. It looks almost modest now, just a scatter of ruins and broken columns, but in its prime. This was the beating heart of the Aegean world. Imagine it, merchants shouting in every tongue from Egypt to Thrace. The smell of olive oil and incense thick in the air, ships jostling for space in the crowded harbor. You can almost hear the clamor of ambition disguised as worship. The Greeks said the island was once adrift, a wandering stone, until Zeus ordered Poseidon to anchor it in place for Leto to give birth. Maybe that's what Delos really was, symbol of civilization finding footing in a restless world. You walk through the sun-bleached ruins, past the Terrace of the Lions, their marble faces eroded to ghostly smiles. They stare east, guarding the island from unseen threats. A coo, pat one absent-mindedly and whisper, "Still doing your job, huh?" Nearby stands the old agora, the marketplace where history and gossip were traded in equal measure. A local guide might have once told you that this was where silver from the mines of Laurion met silk from Persia, where Athenian officials collected taxes with polite tyranny, and where priests counted offerings to Apollo with divine arithmetic. Historians still argue whether Delos was more holy site or money machine, but maybe. That's the same debate we have about every sacred place once wealth starts flowing. The wind carries a faint melody, and you follow it to what remains of the theater. The seats curve in perfect symmetry, stone steps catching the first warmth of morning. Here, the citizens of Delos once gathered to watch comedies and tragedies that mirrored their own ambitions. You picture the actors in masks, declaiming lines about hubris and fate, ironically unaware that their own city would soon fall to both. You sit for a moment, feeling the marble warm beneath you, and the idea strikes. Theater, marketplace, temple, they were all versions of the same thing. Places where humans came to see themselves reflected, to test their limits, to flirt with immortality. The Greeks didn't build monuments to gods, they built mirrors for mankind. The sea breeze thickens with the smell of brine and spice. You wander back toward the harbor and board a small trading vessel bound north. The captain, an old man with arms like knotted rope, tells you he's carrying amphorae of olive oil, jars of honey, and fine Attic pottery. He speaks of trade routes as if they were veins of a living body, the Aegean as bloodstream, pulsing with exchange. You realize the sea was never just a border. It was connection, communication, currency. The people who lived on its shores weren't isolated villagers. They were nodes in a vast network of trade and story. The Greeks shared more than goods. They shared myths, measurements, and methods. One merchant's gossip became another philosopher's theory. The boat drifts past the island of Knossos, shimmering like a jewel in the light. The captain gestures to the mountains and tells you a legend. How young Theseus abandoned Ariadne there after escaping the Minotaur, and how Dionysus found her weeping on the shore. The god of wine and ecstasy, so the tale goes, lifted her tears and turned them into stars. You chuckle softly, thinking how Greek myths always begin with heartbreak and end with astronomy. Yet even amid the romance, there's pragmatism. On Naxos, the quarrying of marble became an art. Its white stone shipped across the sea, two sculptors and architects who transformed it into gods, heroes, and temples. You pass a colossal unfinished statue still lying in the quarry, half-carved, abandoned for reasons lost to time. It's strange something so immense, left incomplete, seems more human than any finished monument. Maybe perfection was never the point. As the sun climbs higher, you feel the air grow heavy with heat. The sailors strip to tunics and splash their faces with seawater. One of them hums a tuna sailor's chant that might be older than the alphabet. You join in, tapping your fingers to the rhythm, and for a brief moment, you're part of an unbroken tradition that stretches back 3,000 years. Same sea, same sun, same song. The ship glides into Miletus, a bustling Ionian port where philosophy was born from curiosity and trade. The streets buzz with dialects and debate. Here Thales once watched the sea and decided that everything life, matter, even the gods might come from water. A simple observation, but revolutionary. You imagine him standing where you are now, squinting at the horizon, thinking, there must be a pattern in all this chaos. You wander through the remains of the city, past colonnades and baths, until you reach the site of an ancient lecture hall. In your mind, you see students lounging on the steps, sandals kicked off, arguing about atoms and destiny. Miletus was a place where questions mattered more than answers. Historians still argue whether this intellectual bloom was sparked by commerce or curiosity. Either way, it proves that philosophy, like trade, thrives where minds collide. You stop at a street vendor, selling bread wrapped in fig leaves. It's warm, slightly sweet, and you wash it down with a gulp of water from a clay cup. The vendor grins and says something about how even the gods need lunch. You nod. There's wisdom in that. Later, you board another vessel, a trireme. This time, sleek and narrow, its rowers moving in perfect rhythm. The captain boasts that this is the same type of ship that defended Greece at Salamis, where the outnumbered Athenian fleet defeated the mighty Persian navy. You can almost see it. The crash of oars, the flash of bronze, the chaos of splintering wood and shouted orders. It's easy to romanticize the battle, but you sense the fear that must have gripped those sailors, the awareness that one wrong stroke meant drowning. Beneath the same sea that raised them. And yet, somehow, they prevailed. Historians still argue whether it was strategy, luck, or divine intervention that turned the tide. Maybe it was simply desperation turned to genius. You pass through narrow straits, cliffs on either side, and feel the air tighten. The sea here looks almost black, reflecting the stone above. The crew rows silently, superstitious. The captain murmurs a prayer to Poseidon under his breath. You've learned not to laugh at that. Beyond the cliffs, the water opens again, and you reach Rhodes, where sunlight flashes off the ruins of what was once the Colossus statue so enormous it was said ships passed beneath its legs. You walk the harbor, imagining that towering bronze god, built to celebrate victory and later destroyed by an earthquake. The pieces lay scattered for centuries, yet travelers still came to see them, as if ruin itself had become sacred. There's something poetic about that. The idea that even when greatness falls, its fragments inspire awe. The Greeks understood impermanence better than most. They built for eternity, but accepted that time would have the last laugh. You think of the Colossus, the Parthenon, even the half-finished statue on Naxos, all beautiful because they dared to defy decay. Evening drifts in. The sky turns lavender, and the sea softens into glass. You sit by the water with a cup of wine that tastes faintly of resin and rosemary. Across the harbor, musicians play a slow, mournful tune on the lyre. The notes rise and fall like breathing. You think about how much of what we call civilization began as rhythm of hammer strikes shaping marble, oars cutting water, hearts sinking to song. The Greeks built their world not only with logic, but with music, with motion. Even their temples seem to dance in symmetry. As night deepens, you lie back on the dock, watching constellations blink into view. There's Orion, there's Cassiopeia, and above you, the Milky Way, a river of stars flowing toward forever. You recall how sailors once used these constellations to steer, turning the sky into a map. The ancients believed each pattern told a story. Heroes, monsters, lost loves frozen in eternity. Maybe that was their way of making the universe feel familiar, of turning infinite chaos into a collection of human memories. You close your eyes and listen to the hush of waves against stone. The voices of philosophers, merchants, and sailors seem to echo in the wind. You realize that beneath all their myths and monuments, the Greeks were united by one thing: curiosity. A restless need to ask, what's beyond that horizon? And even now, lying here, centuries later, you feel it too, that same pull toward mystery, that same hunger for connection. Maybe that's the real secret of the Aegean, not its gods, not its ruins, but its invitation to keep wondering. The night folds around you like a cloak, warm and infinite. The sea hums its low, eternal song. Somewhere in that rhythm, you think you hear a whisper, not from a god, not from history, but from the sea itself. A reminder that everything we build, every story we tell, is just another wave returning to the shore. The next morning begins with a hush, the kind that only the sea can make, a pause between breaths. You drift from Rhodes, leaving behind the harbor's quiet hum, and the Aegean stretches before you again, blue as polished glass. The sunlight is softer now, filtered through a veil of thin clouds. It feels like the world has slowed to let you think. And maybe that's fitting, because today you're not chasing battles or temples. You're chasing whispers, the myths that slip through history like fish through fingers. The oars dip into the water in perfect rhythm, and you imagine yourself in another kind of vessel centuries ago. Maybe a small fishing boat, or maybe the ship of a poet heading toward an island of inspiration. The Greeks believed every island had a spirit, every cave a story, every echo a voice. You're beginning to see why. The sea around you holds more than salt, it holds memory. The island you're approaching is Lesbos, green and rolling, scented with pine and rosemary. It's quiet now, but once it rang with music. This was the home of Sappho, the poet whose verses could make even the gods sigh. Most of her poems are lost, burned, misplaced, or swallowed by time, but the fragments that survive still hum with tenderness. You imagine her sitting near the water's edge, reed pen in hand, describing love not as conquest or tragedy, but as heartbeat, as breath. You find a smooth rock and sit, the sea murmuring at your feet. You whisper her lines, "Someone will remember us." I say, "Even in another time." You smile. She was right. Thousands of years later, here you are, remembering her. Historians still argue whether Sappho was merely a poet or a kind of priestess, leading rituals for Aphrodite on this very shore. The line between art and worship was thin in her world. Maybe still is. Inland, you follow a path through olive groves to the ruins of a small shrine. It's quiet, except for the bees, and yet you can almost hear faint laughter, the echoes of festivals that once honored the goddess of love and beauty. Offerings of flowers, small statues, sometimes even songs. The ancients knew that devotion didn't always need marble. It could live in the sound of a lyre, in a whispered wish, in a poem scrawled on wax. You pause by an old olive tree, its trunk twisted like time itself. Beneath its branches, someone's left a small bowl of honey. Modern, probably a quiet continuation of an ancient act. You realize that faith never really disappears. It just changes its address. By noon, you're sailing again, this time toward the northern Aegean, where the islands grow craggy and wild. The sea darkens, flecked with silver. The air tastes of salt and adventure. The sailors on your boat begin to tell stories, each one wilder than the last. One swears he's seen mermaids near Chios. Another claims there's a cave where the wind sleeps. You laugh, but part of you wonders if they're right. When you reach Chios, you find the landscape split between beauty and brutality, groves of mastic trees, their sap shining like tears, and cliffs that drop straight into the sea. Here, myth and industry coexist. The locals still collect mastic the same way their ancestors did, scraping, drying, whispering small prayers to the trees. It's said the trees wept resin after watching St. Isidore's martyrdom centuries ago. Before that, they cried for Apollo's lost son. The stories change, but the tears remain. You visit a small workshop where the air smells of resin and smoke. The workers smile as they shape the hardened sap into powders and sweets. One of them hands you a tiny crystal to chew, bitter at first, then sweet, almost like truth itself. You can't help but think of how the Greeks turned even sorrow into something useful. Later, you hike toward the mountain caves that locals still call the breath of Zeus. The climb is steep, the path narrow, and your legs protest with every step. But when you reach the top, the wind greets you with a force that feels alive, pressing against your chest like an embrace. Inside the cave, it howls through the stone, a low, constant sound, half storm, half song. The ancients once believed this was where the king of gods spoke to mortals, his voice disguised as thunder. Standing there, with the wind rushing around you, you can almost believe it. You linger just long enough to feel small, then descend, heart still racing. At the base of the hill, an old shepherd sits with his flock, a crooked staff across his knees. He nods at you knowingly. You heard him, didn't you? He says. You grin and shrugged. Maybe. He chuckles. Then you're lucky. Most people come all their lives and only hear wind. You continue westward toward Lemnos, an island of volcanic rock and ancient mystery. The sea here is strangely calm, as if it respects the island's past. Lemnos, the myth said, was the forge of Hephaestus, the god of fire and craftsmanship, who fell from Olympus and landed here, broken but unbowed. You walk the shoreline, where black stones glint under the sun, and you picture sparks flying, hammers ringing, the gods' laughter echoing through smoke. Near the coast, you find a small cave that smells faintly of sulfur. It's easy to imagine this as one of his workshops, a place where raw earth became beauty. The Greeks believed that every craft, every act of creation, was a kind of prayer. You run your fingers along the rock and think of the thousands of artisans who followed that creed: potters, builders, blacksmiths, sculptors. Each strike of the hammer was an offering to something greater than themselves. Further inland lies the ghost of a city, Hephaestia, once the island's proud capital. You wander through its ruins, the columns half swallowed by grass. A single stone arch still stands, framing a view of the glittering sea. Through it, the horizon looks infinite. You wonder how many sailors once looked through that same arch, dreaming of other islands, other lives. A breeze stirs, carrying the faint sound of distant bells, maybe goats, maybe memory. You start walking back toward the coast, the ground warm beneath your feet. The scent of time rises with each step. You're beginning to understand why the Greeks filled their myths with transformation. In this land, everything feels alive enough to change. By the time you reach your boat, the sun is sinking low. The water turns bronze, then crimson, then deep violet. The sailors are quiet now, each lost in thought. You sit at the bow, watching the horizon blur between day and night. You think about the people who once sailed these waters with no maps, no engines, just stars and instinct. You think about the poets who turned storms into metaphors, and the farmers who read the wind like scripture. The Aegean wasn't just a was a conversation between humans and the divine, one that never quite ended. Somewhere far behind you, Delos still gleams in memory. Ahead lies the dark outline of the mainland. The sky deepens, the stars flicker on one by one, and for a moment, you feel suspended between worlds ancient and modern, myth and history, water and air. A gull cries overhead, its voice sharp against the hush. The sailors begin to hum a tune, low and rhythmic. You join in again, without knowing the words, and the sound fills the air like a heartbeat. The sea answers in soft ripples, and the stars seem to listen. Maybe that's the real miracle of the Aegean. It keeps singing back. You lean against the side of the boat, eyelids heavy, heart steady. The waves rock you gently, and you feel a strange sense of kinship, not just with the sailors, but with every soul who's ever crossed these waters. You're part of their story now, just another traveler guided by moonlight and myth. You whisper, "Good night, old sea." The answer comes as a hush, a ripple, a shimmer of silver light. The same lullaby it's sung for millennia. Night drapes itself over the Aegean once more, a velvet blanket studded with stars. The sea reflects them in fractured ribbons, and your boat drifts silently, as though respecting the sacred quiet. You feel the pull of all you've witnessed: the temples, the philosophers, the poets, the sea nymphs, and the artisans whose hands shaped marble and metal alike. Every story, every ruin, every whispered legend hums through the night like a single persistent note. Your journey brings you toward Crete, the largest island in the Aegean, steeped in myths older than most civilizations. You imagine the Minoans, their palaces alive with frescoes depicting dolphins, dancers, and bulls. The famous labyrinth of Knossos spreads in your mind's eye complex. Infinite, a maze of stone corridors and ceremonial halls. People still argue whether the Minotaur was real, symbolic, or entirely invented to scare Athenian visitors. Either way, the story persists, a warning about pride, obsession, and the mysterious human heart. As you approach the shore, the morning sun strikes the cliffs, igniting the ochre and cream stone with fire. You step onto the sand and feel the weight of history under your feet. Even the grains seem older here, polished by centuries of wind, sea, and footsteps. In the distance, goats nibble on sparse brush, their bells jingling faintly, a sound that might be as ancient as the island itself. Walking inland, you encounter the remains of Knossos Palace, its columns broken but still regal, frescoes faded yet vivid enough to whisper their stories. You imagine the kings of Minoan Crete overseeing rituals, their voices carrying through open courtyards. Some historians suggest the palace was primarily administrative, others insist it was religious, a labyrinth of ceremonial space designed to reflect cosmic order. The debate only adds to the mystery. You wander among the ruins, tracing the patterns of bulls and dancers, and you pause at a fresco of a young priestess, arms raised, leading a procession. Her expression is serene, almost playful, and you can't help but smile. The artistry is astonishing, precise, yet full of life. You recall similar expressions in Greek sculptures on Delos and Rhodes, and it hits youth's pursuit of perfection, tempered with humanity, was a shared thread across centuries. Near the palace, a small museum houses artifacts that feel impossibly intimate. Pottery etched with delicate designs, jewelry that once hugged a neck. Clay figurines, each object a tiny voice speaking across time. You lift a piece of pottery, its surface worn smooth by handling, and imagine the hand that shaped it. Perhaps a woman, perhaps a boy apprenticing in a workshop, humming to pass the hours. Even the simplest marks carry a story, a heartbeat captured in clay. The Minoans had strange rituals, some of which persist only in speculation. They worshipped bullhorns, engaged in acrobatics over sacrificial animals, and seemed to revere the sea and the mountain with equal passion. Historians still argue whether these were religious practices, sporting events, or a mix of both. Walking here, it hardly matters. The energy of belief, of devotion, seeps from the stones themselves. Leaving Knossos, you climb a nearby hill to survey the island. Olive groves stretch like a green quilt, valleys dotted with small villages, and the sea glimmers endlessly beyond. From this height, Crete seems less like an island and more like a nexus of human imagination, a place where myth, art, and daily life collided seamlessly. You think of Daedalus and Icarus, the craftsmen and dreamers, and wonder how many tales have begun on cliffs like these, whispered to the wind. Descending toward the coast again, you pass small chapels and shrines, showing how successive generations layered belief over belief. Even as Christianity took root, the echoes of Minoan, Mycenaean, and Greek traditions persisted. Rituals adapt, you realize, but they never truly disappear. The human impulse to mark, to honor, to tell stories, this endures, carried forward by stone, ink, and memory. You step into a small cove where the water laps lazily at a sandy beach. The light filters through scattered clouds, turning the waves into molten silver. You imagine Minoan sailors gliding past in their slender ships, carrying grain, olive oil, and stories from island to island. Some would navigate by stars, some by intuition, and some by what they believed was divine guidance. It strikes you how similar you feel to them, drifting on the same waters, listening to the same songs of the sea. A fisherman appears, hauling nets heavy with small silver fish. He nods at you. No words needed. The bond of those who respect the sea is universal. He invites you to sit on the sand while he repairs his net, and you do, the salt breeze tangling your hair. He points to the horizon, to an island barely visible, and mutters a tale of spirits that guard the shoals. You listen, letting the story settle, not caring if it's true or legend. In this moment, both are equally powerful. Later, as the sun begins to sink, you walk along the cliffs. The light catches shards of marble from a nearby ruin, each fragment glinting like a secret waiting to be discovered. You crouch to touch one, imagining the sculptor's hands, chisel marks still faintly visible. Perhaps it was part of a temple, perhaps a palace, or a home lost to time. Historians debate its origin, but you decide it doesn't matter. The story is alive in your hands. The sky darkens, and the stars begin to blink awake. You lie on the warm stone, listening to the gentle lull of waves. Across the centuries, countless others have done the same, dreamed under the same constellations, whispered hopes to the same sea, and traced patterns in the stars that guided both vessels and hearts. You feel connected, a thread in a tapestry woven over millennia. You close your eyes and allow the sounds of Crete, distant bells of goats, the whisper of wind through olive trees, the lapping of water to merge into one soft, persistent hum. It's a lullaby composed by generations, a melody that has carried sailors, poets, priests, and dreamers alike. You feel the weight of history dissolve into the gentle sway of your boat, the calm certainty of the sea beneath you. As you drift toward sleep, you recall all the islands, All the voices, the philosophers of Athens, the poets of Lesbos, the artisans of Rhodes, the healers of Chios, the builders of Knossos. Each left traces, not just in stone or text, but in the way the air vibrates with memory. You feel their presence like a warm current around you, guiding, reminding, comforting. The Aegean has taught you much, that beauty can survive ruin, that stories outlive their storytellers, and that the line between myth and reality is thinner than we imagine. The islands, the waves, the stars, they are all witnesses, all narrators, all companions on a journey that is both ancient and eternal. You sigh, letting the sound mingle with the hush of the water. The wind settles, the stars burn steadily, and the hum of history becomes a soft, soothing pulse. You feel utterly small, yet impossibly connected part of something vast, timeless, and entirely alive. And as your eyes finally close, the last thought that drifts through your mind is simple. You are home here. In the voices of the Aegean, among the whispers of ancient Greece.